The rain came down in sheets, drenching everything in its path. Pedestrians hurried by, ignoring the woman sitting on the cold, wet concrete. Sarah clutched her daughter, Lily, to her chest, her arms shaking as she tried to keep the child warm. The blanket they had wrapped around her was soaked through, useless against the chill. Lily's breathing was shallow, her tiny body limp in her mother's arms. Sarah had no more tears left to cry, no more energy to plead. She had tried everything, begging, hoping for a miracle. But the world passed her by. She was invisible to them all. "Please, baby, hold on," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "Just a little longer." Her eyes flicked to the crowd moving past her, none of them stopping. They didn't even glance her way. Sarah knew that no one would stop, no one would help. She had already learned that lesson the hard way. But then, out of nowhere, a man stopped in front of her. Ethan Hayes was used to a world where problems were solved with money and influence. He didn't stop for people like her. But as he walked past, something stopped him. His gaze shifted from his phone to the woman sitting on the curb. He noticed the little girl, pale, still, fragile. Ethan didn't hesitate. He walked over, kneeling in front of her. "Are you okay?" His voice was soft, but his concern was real. Sarah looked up at him, her face streaked with rain and tears. She barely recognized the man in front of her, but there was something in his eyes, something different from the indifference she was used to. "My daughter," Sarah managed to whisper. "She needs help. I don't know where else to turn." Ethan looked down at the girl in Sarah's arms. Her skin was as cold as ice. He could see the signs of illness, the fever. She was suffering, and he had the means to stop it. "I'll get her help," Ethan said, his voice firm. He pulled out his phone, dialing the hospital without another word. His mind raced, but for once, it wasn't with business deals or numbers. It was with something far more important, the life of this child. If you had the power to save someone's life, would you take action? Subscribe now to follow the journey. Ethan arranged for an ambulance to come immediately. The paramedics arrived soon after, their voices steady as they assessed the situation. They lifted Lily carefully onto the stretcher, and Sarah followed, her hand gripping Ethan's sleeve. No one has stopped," Sarah said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't know what had compelled him to stop. Maybe it was the sight of the little girl, or maybe it was the way Sarah held on to her, as if she was the last thing she had left. Whatever it was, he couldn't walk away. How far would you go to help someone who's lost everything? Hit subscribe and stay with us as this journey unfolds. The ambulance ride was long, the lights flashing against the dark streets of Chicago. Ethan sat beside Sarah, but there were no words between them. The tension in the air was thick, filled with the weight of what might be. Ethan had seen death before, he had seen it in the boardrooms, in the loss of business deals, in the coldness of the world he lived in. But this was real. When they arrived at the hospital, Ethan didn't leave Sarah's side. He was there when Lily was wheeled into the emergency room, when the doctors rushed in to stabilize her. Time moved slowly, each minute an eternity. Ethan watched, helpless, as Sarah clung to the edge of her seat, praying for a miracle. What would you do if your life collided with someone else's, and you had the power to change everything? Subscribe now to see how Ethan's decision to help will change their lives forever. Hours later, the doctor came out, his expression guarded but hopeful. "She's stable," he said, relief flooding through Sarah's face as she stood up, her knees buckling beneath her. "We've managed to bring her temperature down, and we've started her on the right antibiotics. She'll need to stay overnight for monitoring, but she should be okay." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to collapse, to let the weight of everything she had carried fall from her shoulders, but she didn't. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with gratitude. "You saved her," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan just nodded, his face softening for the first time since he'd walked into the emergency room. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad she's going to be okay. If you could change the course of someone's life with just one decision, would you?" Stay tuned and subscribe for more of this powerful story. As the hours passed, Sarah stayed by Lily's side, watching as the child slowly regained strength. Ethan left the hospital that night, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. There was something more at play here, something bigger than just this moment. He had made a promise to Sarah and Lily. But now, Ethan had to confront something he couldn't control, the question of what to do next. He had stepped into their lives, and for better or worse, he couldn't walk away now. The following days were a blur of sterile rooms, monitors beeping, and whispered conversations with doctors. Ethan Hayes, once a man who could fix anything with money or influence, found himself powerless in a world that didn't play by his rules. He had arranged everything, the best doctors, the most advanced treatment, but the one thing money couldn't buy was the peace he so desperately sought. The truth hung heavy in the air. Sarah hadn't left Lily's side, and Ethan, despite his discomfort, couldn't bring himself to walk away either. He had promised her, and somehow, that promise felt more like a lifeline than a responsibility. He'd never cared about anyone the way he cared about them. Not even his own family. Lily's condition had improved, but the lingering effects of her fever remained. The doctors had said she would recover, but Sarah's worry lines didn't disappear with the prognosis. Every minute away from her daughter felt like a stolen moment. Ethan watched her as she stood by the window of the hospital room, staring out into the city. Her shoulders were slumped, the weight of exhaustion pulling her down. "Sarah," Ethan said, walking toward her, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to do this alone." She turned to him, her eyes tired but grateful. "I've done it alone for a long time," she said, her voice distant, as if the words themselves had been rehearsed over years of survival. "I've gotten by. I've always gotten by. But now you don't have to," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "I'm here. You and Lily don't have to go back to that life. I'll help you both." She looked at him, her gaze softening but tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want to owe you anything, Ethan." Her voice broke just slightly at the end, the weight of pride and fear clashing in her words. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice gentle. "I've seen enough of the world to know what truly matters. I've been living in my own bubble, blind to the real pain out there. I didn't stop to help when I should've." His eyes met hers, the weight of his past choices pressing on him. "But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. What would you do if you had the chance to change someone's life? Would you step in and help, or stay in the safety of your own world? Comment where you're watching from." For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to breathe, even if only for a moment. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, but the reality of what lay ahead loomed large. She was still terrified, of the future, of what would happen when they left the hospital. She didn't know how to trust again, how to believe that things could ever truly change for them. Ethan, however, was determined to make that change happen. The next morning, after hours of paperwork, insurance calls, and endless arrangements, Ethan met with the hospital staff. The room was cold, the conversation clinical, but Ethan's resolve was unwavering. He offered to cover all of Sarah and Lily's expenses, to ensure that they had everything they needed, not just for the next few weeks, but for the long road to recovery. But as the words left his mouth, he realized something deeper was at play here. He wasn't just offering financial support, he was offering a life. A chance at something Sarah had given up on, a chance at safety, stability, and even a family. Ethan was offering her a chance to trust again, something he had no right to give but knew he had to. Would you trust someone who promised to change your life? Or would you hesitate, afraid that it might be too good to be true? Subscribe now to see how Ethan and Sarah's journey unfolds. As the days passed, Ethan found himself visiting more frequently. The business deals, the contracts, everything he'd built his empire on, felt insignificant compared to the weight of Sarah's world. Every decision he made, every phone call, felt like it was taking him further away from the life he once knew and deeper into a reality he couldn't ignore. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the city skyline, Ethan sat in the quiet of the hospital room with Sarah and Lily. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside her daughter's bed, her face soft in the dim light. Lily's breathing was steady, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The chaos of his world, the power, the money, no longer held the same grip on him. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about charity. It had become something deeper, something he couldn't explain. He wasn't just helping Sarah and Lily out of guilt or obligation anymore. He had become invested in their future, in their lives. He made a decision then. He wasn't just going to offer them a new start. He was going to help them build a life. That night, he called his assistant and began making arrangements for a place for Sarah and Lily to stay, far away from the streets. It was a decision that would change everything. If you had the power to change someone's life forever, how far would you go? Would you just offer help, or would you give them the chance to build something new? Subscribe now to follow their journey to a new life. The next day, Sarah woke to the sight of Ethan standing by the window, his back to her, his phone pressed to his ear as he made calls. He had arranged for a new home for them, an apartment in a safe neighborhood with everything they could need. It was far removed from the streets, from the uncertainty of their old life. Ethan had made it clear, this was their fresh start. He wasn't leaving them behind. As Sarah stood in the doorway, she felt a flicker of hope in her chest, the first one she'd allowed herself in years. She had been through so much, had seen so much darkness, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of light. Ethan turned to her, offering a quiet smile as he ended his call. It's all set. You and Lily will be safe. No more worrying about where you're going to sleep tonight. For the first time since they had met, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She had never thought it was possible to trust again. But in this moment, with the man who had changed their lives, she allowed herself to believe. The days following Sarah and Lily's release from the hospital passed in a blur of paperwork, doctor's visits, and the slow process of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of the streets. Ethan had done everything he could, paid for the medical bills, arranged for their new home, and ensured they had the support they needed. But for Sarah, nothing felt normal. She had never been this close to stability, and it left her both grateful and afraid. The apartment was small, but it was clean. The windows looked out onto a quiet street lined with trees, far from the noise and chaos of the city. For once, there were no shadows looming over her, no fear of the next move she would have to make just to survive. And yet, despite all of Ethan's efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sarah sat by the window one afternoon, staring out at the neighborhood that had become their home, her mind far away. Lily was asleep in the other room, finally getting the rest she needed after the harrowing days of illness. The hum of a city outside seemed distant, a life that felt so far removed from the world she had left behind. But no matter how much Ethan tried to shield them, she knew something wasn't right. There was too much about her past she couldn't leave behind. She couldn't let go of the feeling that the dark world she had once been part of was still waiting, watching, ready to pull her back in. What would you do if you found yourself in a place you never thought possible, only to realize the past won't let you go? Hit subscribe to see how Sarah's story unfolds. Ethan had been quieter than usual lately, his mind preoccupied with something she couldn't see. Every night, he worked late, making calls, meeting with people she couldn't understand. Sarah tried not to ask, but the tension in the air was palpable. Ethan had become more than just a man who had helped them, he had become their protector, but even he seemed unsure of what came next. One evening, after dinner, Ethan sat across from Sarah, his hands folded tightly in front of him. He was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The weight of the promises he had made was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about helping Sarah and Lily for a few weeks, or even a few months. This was a long-term commitment. "I've been thinking," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "I want to make sure you and Lily have everything you need, but I can't do it alone. There's something I need to tell you." Sarah's heart skipped. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it?" Ethan paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I've been helping you, but there's more to this. I'm not just offering financial support. I want to help you build a new life. But I can't do that while keeping my distance. I know it's hard to trust, especially after everything you've been through, but I need you to trust me, Sarah. I'm in this for the long haul. And I can't promise it will be easy, but I'm committed to seeing this through." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She wasn't sure if it was hope or fear that was swelling inside her chest, but she couldn't ignore the truth in Ethan's eyes. He wasn't just offering help. He was offering his life. What would you do if someone offered you a chance to start over, but it came with the uncertainty of the future? Subscribe now to follow Sarah's journey as she faces new challenges. The days that followed were a mix of hope and apprehension. Ethan continued his work, but now he was also focused on helping Sarah build a future, not just a present. They had a home now, but it was more than just walls and a roof. It was the first step toward something she hadn't thought was possible, freedom. But Sarah couldn't escape her past. Even in this safe place, the nagging fear never left her. She knew too much about the world she had left behind, the people who had once controlled her life. She had lived in constant fear of being hunted, used, and discarded. And now, despite everything Ethan had given her, the reality of that fear was settling in. One evening, while Sarah and Lily were at home, Ethan left for a meeting. When he returned, his face was drawn, his jaw clenched tightly. It was then that Sarah saw it, the change in him. He wasn't the confident, unflappable man he had been before. This man was someone who was starting to feel the weight of his choices. "Ethan?" she asked quietly, her heart tightening at the sight of him. "What happened?" Ethan sat down beside her, rubbing his temples as if trying to process everything. "I met with someone today," he said, his voice rough. "A contact I thought I could trust. I was trying to make sure Mason was out of the picture, trying to get him off your back for good." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But I learned something today that I wasn't prepared for. Someone else knows about you and Lily. Someone dangerous." The air seemed to thicken around them. Sarah's heart began to race as she met his eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned to her, his eyes full of determination and something darker. "It means that we need to be ready. This isn't over, Sarah. Whoever's behind this won't stop. And I won't let them take you or Lily back to that life. When the past won't stay buried, how far would you go to protect the people you love?" Subscribe and stay with us as Sarah's story takes a darker turn. The promise Ethan had made was becoming a reality. He was stepping into a world he never wanted to know. And the more he uncovered, the more dangerous the stakes became. He had promised Sarah and Lily a new life, but now, it seemed like their greatest challenge was just beginning. Ethan was committed. But the true test was yet to come. The apartment was quiet now. For the first time in days, Sarah could hear her own thoughts. The chaos of the hospital, the rush of unfamiliar faces, the endless paperwork, it had all been a blur. Now, as she sat on the couch, staring out the window at the quiet street below, it felt like the storm had passed. But the calm brought its own kind of tension. Ethan had kept his promise. He had given them more than just a roof over their heads, he had given them hope. The apartment was modest, not extravagant, but it was theirs. It was a place they could start over, away from the streets and the uncertainty of survival. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had spent so many years fighting for every scrap of stability, so many years alone, that she wasn't sure how to accept the kindness being offered to her. Ethan wasn't just a man helping them out of pity, he was offering them a life, a future. And that was terrifying. Lily was asleep in her room, her soft breath steady for the first time in what felt like forever. Sarah had never realized how much fear she had been holding on to, until she saw her daughter finally at peace. But even as she sat there, staring at the quiet apartment, Sarah couldn't ignore the ache in her chest. She didn't want to feel like a burden. She didn't want to owe Ethan anything. What would you do if someone gave you a chance to start fresh, but it meant depending on them for the first time in your life? Subscribe now to see how Sarah learns to trust again. Ethan came in after a few hours, his suit slightly wrinkled, his face more tired than usual. He had been working tirelessly to ensure Sarah and Lily were set up, but today had been harder. The questions kept piling up, about the future, about his role in their lives. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't walking away. Not now, not ever. "Everything okay?" he asked softly as he walked into the living room. Sarah looked up at him, trying to mask the uncertainty in her eyes. I'm not sure how to handle all of this. You've done so much already." Ethan sat down beside her, his eyes gentle but firm. "You don't have to handle anything alone anymore. That's the point. I made a promise to help, and I'm going to keep it. You and Lily don't have to be alone." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Ethan's heart clenched. He could see the fear in her eyes, the deep scar that came from years of surviving on her own. He couldn't fix that overnight, but he could show her that she wasn't alone anymore. "You don't have to trust me all at once. Just trust me enough to take one step at a time," he said quietly. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to start over. I've spent so long just trying to survive." Ethan gently placed a hand on hers. "Surviving is important. But now it's time to live. You and Lily deserve more than just getting by. You deserve peace, happiness, and a future. And I'm here to make sure you get that. If you were given a second chance at life, would you take it? Or would you be too afraid to trust again?" Subscribe and stay tuned as Sarah learns to trust, and Ethan learns to love. That night, after a quiet dinner, Ethan found himself lost in thought. He had made promises to both Sarah and Lily, but the weight of them felt heavier than he had expected. He had never been the type to make long-term commitments. In his world, everything was temporary, fleeting. But this felt different. He had never imagined his life would take this turn. Helping a homeless woman and her child hadn't been in his plans, but now that he had stepped into their world, he knew he couldn't turn back. He wasn't sure how deep this would go, but something about it felt right. He felt needed. As he stood up to leave, he turned to Sarah, his voice steady but softer than usual. "We'll get there, Sarah. Together." She smiled faintly, her eyes still holding that guarded vulnerability. "Thank you. I'm not used to people keeping their word." Ethan smiled back, though there was a weight in his chest. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't walking away from them. What would you do if someone promised to help you build a new life? Would you take that leap, or stay trapped in the fear of what might go wrong? Subscribe to find out what happens next in Sarah and Ethan's journey. The next few weeks were filled with small victories. Lily's health continued to improve, and Sarah began to settle into the new routine of the apartment. Ethan had arranged for a part-time job for Sarah, working in a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ethan had promised to help, and now he was finding ways to help her rebuild, step by step. But even as things started to fall into place, Sarah couldn't shake the fear that something was missing. She had always been the one to hold everything together, to take care of herself and Lily. She didn't know how to accept help without feeling like she was giving up part of herself. But as she watched Ethan work tirelessly to ensure they had everything they needed, she realized that maybe it wasn't about accepting charity. Maybe it was about accepting that she deserved a future. That Lily deserved a future. And for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. The city outside felt distant as Sarah walked through the apartment with a quiet sense of disbelief. Everything was slowly falling into place, piece by piece, and yet the weight of it all still pressed down on her. It had been weeks since they had moved in, since Ethan had made the promise to change their lives. Lily was doing well, her health had improved, and Sarah felt more hope than she had in a long time. The work at the cafe kept her busy, and the routine of normal life was something she hadn't realized she missed so much. But deep down, she could still feel the remnants of fear clinging to her. The fear that she wasn't truly safe. The fear that, no matter how far she ran, the past would catch up with her. What would you do if you had the chance to build a life from nothing, but the past kept pulling you back? Subscribe now to see how Sarah takes control of her future. Ethan had given them so much, his time, his resources, his heart. And while Sarah was grateful, a part of her couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was losing herself in the process. It was hard to accept the help, even if it was coming from someone who truly cared. Her pride, the part of her that had always kept her moving, kept her fighting, felt like it was slipping away with every act of kindness. She had been strong for so long, but now, in this new life, she was beginning to wonder who she was without the weight of survival on her shoulders. Without the constant battle of trying to keep her daughter alive in a world that didn't care. The apartment was quiet that evening, except for the soft sounds of Lily playing in her room. Ethan was out on another business call, and Sarah had found herself alone for the first time in a long while. The silence in the room pressed against her, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself breathe. It felt like too much. This new life, this fragile peace, it was all too much to take in. She was afraid that one wrong move, one misstep, could bring it all crashing down. When Ethan returned, he found her standing at the window, looking out at the city. Her eyes were distant, her thoughts clearly miles away. "Sarah?" Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" She turned to him, her face softening when she saw the concern in his eyes. He always looked at her like he had nothing but time, but she could feel the weight of everything that had passed between them. She didn't want him to see the fear, the doubt that she couldn't shake. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm just thinking." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "About what?" "Everything," Sarah said quietly. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life. I don't know how to trust this. Trust that it's real." Ethan took a step toward her, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to trust it all at once. But you do have to trust that you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." Sarah felt the walls around her heart shift just slightly, but it wasn't enough. The past still haunted her, still threatened to pull her back into the shadows. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can really let go of all of it. The fear, the constant worry. It's all I've known." Ethan moved closer, his hand resting gently on hers. "I understand. But we're not in this alone. We'll figure it out together. If you had the chance to start over, but you were haunted by your past, would you take that step? Or would the fear hold you back?" Subscribe and stay with us to see how Sarah learns to embrace her new life. The next morning, Ethan's day was filled with meetings and calls. But for the first time, he found his mind wandering back to Sarah and Lily. He had kept his distance at times, believing that helping them meant providing for them, not getting too emotionally involved. But the deeper he got into their lives, the more he realized how much he was invested in them, how much he cared. There was still something unspoken between them. Something that had yet to be addressed. Ethan had learned to keep his emotions under control in his world of deals and power. But Sarah had opened up something in him that he didn't expect. He had become more than just a man offering help. He had become someone who wanted to protect them, not just out of obligation, but because he had come to care about them deeply. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself standing in front of the office window, staring at the skyline. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't move to answer it. His thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah's words, "I'm scared." He realized something then, something that shifted the weight of the situation. He was scared too. Scared that, despite all his promises, he couldn't fix everything. Scared that the past would find a way to tear their fragile peace apart. What happens when you realize that the person you've tried to help has become someone you can't live without? Subscribe to see where Ethan and Sarah's journey takes them next. Later that evening, Ethan walked into the apartment after a long day. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her eyes focused on Lily as the child played with her toys on the floor. The sight of them together, of this fragile little family he had promised to protect, made him realize just how deep he was into this. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady. "I've been thinking." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice softer now. "But I know I want to be here. For you and for Lily. I want to help you rebuild your life, not just with money, but with everything I can offer." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. His words, his honesty, it hit her harder than she expected. She nodded, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "Thank you, Ethan. I never thought I'd be able to let anyone in, but maybe you're right. Maybe we can build something new." The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the apartment. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of normalcy. Lily giggled as she stacked blocks on the floor, oblivious to the hardships that had once consumed her young life. Sarah watched, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and awe. She had never known such peace. Ethan entered the apartment carrying bags of groceries and supplies. He moved quietly, careful not to startle Lily, who squealed with delight when she saw him. The little girl ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his legs, and Ethan bent down, lifting her gently. "You've got quite the appetite," he said softly, smiling as he set the groceries on the counter. "We've got plenty now, no more worrying about what's for dinner." Sarah glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You've done so much for us, Ethan. I don't even know where to begin to thank you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I promised to help, and promises are meant to be kept." His eyes lingered on her for a moment, unspoken thoughts in his gaze. "It's time we start thinking about the bigger picture, school, stability, future plans. I want to make sure Lily grows up in a safe, loving environment. Not just surviving, but thriving." Ethan spent the next few hours making calls. He arranged for Lily to be enrolled in a nearby school, one that would provide support for children coming from difficult circumstances. He also set up a temporary scholarship fund to ensure that Lily had access to extracurricular activities, books, and tutoring if needed. Sarah watched him, astonished. "You're going above and beyond," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "I don't even know how to process all of this." Ethan's voice was calm, measured, yet firm. "It's not about processing. It's about making sure you and Lily have the stability you deserve. The past is gone, Sarah. We can't change it. But we can control what happens next." The determination in his words resonated with her. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight of fear lift slightly. She didn't have to figure out every obstacle alone anymore. Imagine being given a chance to start completely over. Would you accept it, or would fear hold you back? Subscribe to follow how Ethan and Sarah rebuild their lives. Later that evening, Ethan and Sarah took Lily to a small park nearby. It was a quiet street corner of the city, away from the usual chaos, where the little girl could run freely and safely. Ethan pushed Lily gently on the swing while Sarah watched, her hands clasped together, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. I can't even remember the last time she laughed like this, Sarah whispered. Her eyes met Ethan's, and she realized just how much he had changed their lives in such a short time. Ethan nodded, his face softening. It's a start. There's still work to do, but this is a good start. As they walked home, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The apartment, the school plans, the laughter, they were small steps, but steps nonetheless. For the first time, she could imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving. Back at the apartment, Ethan pulled out a list of potential resources, community programs, local support networks, and opportunities for Sarah to find part-time work that would help her regain independence without overwhelming her. He went through the options carefully, explaining each to her, listening as she weighed her choices. Sarah felt empowered in a way she hadn't in years. She was beginning to understand that Ethan wasn't just helping her survive, he was giving her the tools to reclaim her life. If someone offered you a chance to take control of your life after years of struggle, would you seize it? Comment where you're watching from and stay tuned for the next chapter. By the time the evening settled in, Lily was asleep in her room, exhausted but happy. Ethan and Sarah sat together on the couch, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the city outside. Ethan leaned back, reflecting on everything they had achieved in just a few short weeks. The girls' laughter, the new apartment, the plans for school, it was more than he had expected when he had first seen Sarah and Lily on that rainy street. He realized that sometimes, real power wasn't in money or influence, it was in the ability to change someone's life, to give them hope when all seemed lost. Sarah glanced at him, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, for everything. Ethan smiled gently. You don't need to. Just live, Sarah. That's all I ask. Live well. And we'll do it together. As he looked out the window, Ethan knew there would still be challenges ahead. But tonight, for the first time, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a real difference. And in the heart of the city that had once seemed indifferent, a small family had begun to build a future they never thought possible. The cabin was quiet, nestled in the woods, far away from the hustle of city life. For the first time in a long while, the sounds of nature replaced the constant buzz of traffic and voices. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the sun cast a golden light over everything, making it feel like the world outside didn't exist. Sarah stood at the large window, looking out over the forest. She had never felt more at peace, yet a small, nagging fear still clung to her. Ethan had arranged this trip for them, away from the chaos and pressure. A chance to breathe, to step outside of the life they'd been trapped in. But no matter how beautiful the setting, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too good to be true. Lily was outside, playing with a toy in the yard. Sarah watched her for a moment, a soft smile crossing her lips. Her daughter was laughing, her joy pure and innocent, untouched by the harshness of the world. For the first time, Sarah felt a sense of relief, knowing that Lily was safe. But that feeling quickly shifted to unease. The world hadn't forgotten about them. And as much as Ethan tried to shield them, Sarah knew that the past had a way of catching up. Ethan joined her at the window, his presence grounding her, offering a silent reassurance. She's happy, he said softly, his eyes on Lily as well. We're doing the right thing. You know that, right? Sarah turned to look at him. His eyes held a quiet certainty, a strength that Sarah had come to rely on. He had done so much for them, more than anyone ever had. And yet, there was something in his gaze, something unspoken, that kept her from fully letting go. She had trusted him, trusted his promise to protect them, but there were still so many unknowns. I know, she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But I can't stop thinking about everything we've been through. The streets, the fear. I feel like I'm waiting for something to go wrong. Ethan's expression softened as he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You don't have to wait anymore. You're safe now. We both are. But I get it. It's not easy to leave the past behind. But we're building something new here. She nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The memories of the past, the years of struggle and survival, were still fresh in her mind. No matter how hard she tried to push them away, they always resurfaced. The scars were deep, and they weren't just physical. The emotional wounds were harder to heal, and the fear that it could all slip away at any moment was still there. What do you do when you're given a second chance at life, but the weight of your past keeps pulling you back? Subscribe now to stay with us as Sarah and Ethan navigate their new reality. As the days passed, Sarah tried to embrace the peace of the cabin. The morning walks, the quiet dinners, the slow pace of life. It felt like a dream, like she was finally able to take a breath without worrying about the next day's survival. But then, as evening approached, the weight of reality returned. Ethan was out for a walk, and Sarah found herself sitting on the porch, staring out at the vast stretch of trees. She had never felt so isolated, so alone with her thoughts. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, walls that were now starting to crumble. But that didn't mean she knew how to let go. She didn't know how to trust completely. And the thought of trusting someone, of relying on someone else for her happiness, scared her more than anything. Ethan returned to find Sarah sitting on the porch, her eyes distant, her body tense. He could see it, the walls she was still holding up. No matter how much he tried to convince her she was safe, he knew that the weight of her past wouldn't disappear overnight. He knew that Sarah was still afraid of losing herself again, afraid that trusting him would come at a cost she wasn't ready to pay. Sarah? Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, soft but steady. She looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to express before. I don't know how to let go of the past, Ethan. It's too much. I'm scared that if I do, I'll lose everything again. I don't know how to trust that it's real. Ethan knelt down in front of her, his gaze unwavering. I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to give us a chance at a future. A real future. One where you and Lily don't have to live in fear anymore. She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. I've spent so long being afraid. I don't know how to be anything else. You don't have to do it alone, Ethan said, his voice firm yet gentle. I'm here, Sarah. And I'm not going anywhere. If you had the chance to let go of your past and trust in a new future, would you? Or would the fear of losing it all hold you back? Subscribe to see how Sarah learns to embrace the future Ethan promises. As Sarah looked into his eyes, she saw the truth in them, the sincerity, the unwavering commitment. Ethan had proven himself in every way. But she still had a hard time believing it. She didn't know how to let go of the fear, how to allow herself to trust again. But she was trying. She was trying, for Lily's sake, for their sake. The days in the cabin became a turning point. Sarah began to relax, if only a little. She started to open up, talking more freely with Ethan about her past, about the fears that still haunted her. They spent long evenings together, talking about everything and nothing, just enjoying each other's company. Ethan never pushed her, never asked for more than she was ready to give. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Sarah turned to him, her voice softer than it had been before. Thank you, for everything. I don't know where I'd be without you. I've never had someone look out for me like this. Ethan's smile was small but genuine. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. This is what we do when we care about someone. We help each other, we lift each other up. What would you do if you found someone who truly cared about you, someone who was willing to give you a second chance? Hit subscribe to see how Sarah and Ethan's story unfolds. The night felt like a turning point for Sarah. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with peace, stability, and love. She had spent so many years surviving that she hadn't realized what it meant to truly live. But now, with Ethan by her side, she was starting to see what that life could look like. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Sarah took a deep breath as she walked outside to join Ethan. For the first time in months, she felt ready to face the future, whatever it might bring. The apartment was quieter than usual that morning. Sarah stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. It had been weeks since they had moved in, and while the new life they were starting had brought hope, the quiet stillness sometimes felt overwhelming. Lily was playing in her room, and for the first time since they'd arrived, Sarah found herself lost in thought. The fear that had been her constant companion was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. She had promised herself that she would let go of the past, but some days it felt impossible. She had come a long way since Ethan had stepped into her life. She could feel herself changing, healing even. But every now and then, the fear crept back in, the fear of what would happen if they couldn't outrun the shadows of her past. The knock at the door startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was early, too early for unexpected visitors. She walked over to the door and opened it, finding Ethan standing there with an envelope in hand. "Morning," Ethan said with a warm smile. "Got a little something for you." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Ethan stepped inside, handing her the envelope. "It's time to take the next step, Sarah." She tore open the envelope and found a letter and a check inside. Her eyes widened as she read through the letter. It was from the local community center, offering her a position as a coordinator for a youth program they were starting. They needed someone who had experience working with kids, someone who could understand the struggles many of them faced. The check was for the first month's salary, a sum that would cover not just the bills, but also the little luxuries Sarah had been too afraid to dream of. She looked up at Ethan, her voice shaking. "You did this? You really think I can do this?" Ethan smiled, his eyes full of pride. "I know you can. I've seen what you've done for Lily. Now it's time to do something for yourself." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, stunned by the opportunity, the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. Her mind raced as she realized how much she wanted this, how much she needed to step into the world again, to find a place where she could make a difference. What would you do if the opportunity to rebuild your life was handed to you on a silver platter? Would you take it, or would fear hold you back? Subscribe to find out how Sarah seizes the future that awaits. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself walking through the neighborhood, thinking about the future. It had been a long time since she had been able to think beyond survival. For so many years, she had just tried to keep her daughter safe, never imagining that there could be more to life than just getting by. But now, with Ethan's help, she was starting to see a future that wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. That evening, after dinner, Sarah sat down with Ethan at the kitchen table, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. She had told him about the job offer, the position that could help her feel like she had a purpose again. But as much as she wanted it, there was still the fear of what might happen if she stepped into that world. Could she really leave behind the fear that had been with her for so long? "I want to take it," Sarah said quietly, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edges of her napkin. "I want to step into the future. But I'm scared." Ethan watched her, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it. I do. But you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, you've got me and Lily. And you've got a future that's waiting for you." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He was right. The fear had always kept her from moving forward, but now, with Ethan by her side, it didn't feel as impossible. "You really believe in me, don't you?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "I always have. What if you had someone who believed in you, even when you couldn't believe in yourself? Would you take that leap of faith?" Subscribe to follow Sarah as she makes her decision to take control of her future. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Sarah began the process of transitioning into her new role at the community center. Ethan continued to support her, always encouraging her to trust herself, to take each step with confidence. They spent the evenings discussing the future, planning the next steps for Lily's education, their lives, and their future as a family. As Sarah settled into her new job, she began to feel a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't known in years. She worked with the kids, helping them with their struggles, offering them the guidance and care that had once been denied to her. She found herself in a world she had never expected, helping others and, in turn, helping herself. But there were still moments when the fear crept back in. When the past seemed too close, too real. But each time, Ethan was there, grounding her, reminding her that the life they had built together was real. That they were safe now. What would you do if you had the chance to build a life for yourself, one step at a time, with someone who truly believed in you? Subscribe to see Sarah and Ethan's journey unfold, and to learn how they face the challenges ahead. One evening, as Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset with Lily in her arms, Ethan joined them, a quiet smile on his face. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "I know," Sarah replied, her voice filled with awe. "I never thought I could be here, in this place, with you and Lily. I didn't think it was possible." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "I told you from the beginning that you weren't alone anymore. This is just the beginning, Sarah." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, still filled with obstacles. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face them. She had a family now, a life she could build, and with Ethan by her side, she knew she wasn't walking into the future alone.